Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies again with another video. Now, unfortunately, this question came to me based on a mistake that was made by a SE. Not going to say the name. Just know that, good person, they just made a mistake. Asked me a question. I decided to make a video on it. So hopefully nobody else makes this mistake. He's correcting it now. But I'm going to do this so nobody else makes a mistake. So what we're going to talk about today is the difference between multi-context mode on the ASA and multi-instance mode on the FTD. Why this is so important? Because if you make the mistake and you sell the FTD with the threat defense software with the uh, multi-context configurations behind it, if you say, "Hey, you can do multi-context mode on an FTD," you're going to have a pissed off customer because you cannot do that. So I'm going to do this video to explain the difference between the two, and then so you don't pick the wrong firewall. That's the whole point of this. So let's go to the board here, and we're going to talk about multi context mode. I'll just say ASA versus multi instance mode on FTD. Okay. Well, let's first talk about multi-context mode. So multi-context mode is a technique where you can take a firewall, right? And you can chop this firewall into multiple contexts or virtual firewalls. So by default, you're going to get a system context, which you should not be doing any configurations in. If you're doing this, you're going to get an admin context. And when I say don't do too much in the system context, like you don't want to use that as an actual context to do production working, right? Then you have admin context, and then you have your user contexts, right? So this would be, context A, B, and C. Now you could switch between the two. The thing is, you cannot go from a user context to another user context. You kind of got to go back to the admin and to. It's a weird thing that you have to do is go to the admin and go out for security purposes. But you can switch between contexts. Now this is one big firewall. So what you would do is you would assign, usually your admin context, you're just going to assign one port for management so you can get into the other context. You don't really need to be doing too much there. And then you're going to assign, ETH 1, 2. This context gets ETH 3, 4. And this context gets ETH, 5, 6. All right. And then you do your normal stuff like on a firewall. You assign your zones, security levels, NAT policies, the whole nine. These are all going to be treated as one single firewall, but you have multiple contexts. So you have three, technically, you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 virtual firewalls if you want to count the admin context. And then you'll go ahead and just do your normal configurations there under one box. The key why everybody liked this is because all of this was one license in particular, just one license to do this, right? And you can have multiple contexts. I just drew 3 here, but you can have multiple contexts and it's on the one license, right? That is totally different on the FTD, right? This whole concept disappeared. So please do not sell the FTD thinking that you can do multi-context mode. I'm telling you from personal experience, seeing it live, watching a customer blow up on somebody because they thought they were getting multi-context mode on an FTD, and you had to tell them, sorry, that doesn't exist. So now let's compare that to FTDs. So on the FTD platform, you have something called multi-instance, right? Now, the multi-instance capability are on 4000 series, 9000 series, right? These are, I would say, if you ever dealt with the US or UCSB chassis, that's kind of what this is, right? So what you can do is you can add multiple security modules in here, SMs, SIMs, and then you can have multiple network modules in here, right? Which you can assign. And then you can actually build out your platforms. Now you can install the ASA or the FTD on these kind of chassis. Now, it depends on this thing called a CSP file. Now, the CSP file is basically the installation package. Think of it like VMware, like an OVA file. Same thing. CSP file is just for, the FTDs or ASAs that you want to install. So you can get the FTD package or you get the ASA package. Now, there is some things called resource profiles in here. So resource profiles. And the resource profiles are when you want to install an FTD or an ASA via CSP file. There are two ways to do the installation. All right. You can install it as native to the SM. So native to the SM means I'm going to use the entire SM module. Right. And then you have container. And this is where the multi-instance mode comes into play. Because you're going to chop up the SM module using these resource profiles based on the CPUs, right? That's the only thing you can chop up. You can't chop up the memory. You can't chop up anything other than CPUs. So you can say, if you had a small firewall, you can say, I'm going to assign it 5 CPUs, all right? Medium, depending on what you want to call a medium, you can say that's 15. And then large, if you want to, you can say that's like 30 CPUs. Now, it also depends on the SM module you buy. They have SM modules that are like SM48s, which means there are 48 CPUs that are assignable on that SM module. Then you have 40s, I believe, that has 40. Really depends on your SM module. So you got to be careful. If you're going to do multi-instance mode containerized, you got to make sure your resource profiles map to how many CPUs you actually got on the SM module, right? And then these network modules you would also assign to the ASA or FTD when you build it, because there's a section in here that's when you actually do the installation, it's going to ask you, hey, you have, let me use green here or yellow. You have data ports, and you got management ports. All right. Obviously, your data points are going to be your data plane. That's what traffic goes through. And each instance needs to have its own respective management. That's what I would do. Now you can share it, but you need to be careful with the sharing because it can get a little wonky from what I seen last time. But you can have separate management ports for each FTD instance that you put on here. Now, the one thing that's another critical piece that's different between the ASA and the FTD platform when you're doing multi-instance is you do have to worry about now this thing called FXOS. And I know people probably are like, oh my God, FSOS. This is the chassis manager. All right. This is the chassis manager. So the chassis manager is something you also have to make sure is running on the right piece of code for whatever module you're trying to run, or whatever model of FTD you're trying to run. And now you have to go look up, hey, what's the FXOS code that is compatible with the FTD that I'm trying to run? You have to run it based on those recommendations because you can run into some problems if you have an outdated FXOS code with the newest model of FTD. Right. So now when you do upgrades, not only are you upgrading the FTD and the FMC, but you're also upgrading the FXOS. And you usually have to upgrade the FXOS first before you upgrade the FTD. I've seen a lot of people try to do it backwards and end up, causing a problem because they did it backwards and now they're out of sync and they're experiencing some problems. So again, this is ASA multi-context versus multi-instance on the FTD. And the real kicker here is every FTD that you create, every instance needs its own license. That's where you're going to get burnt. If you want to, now, if you only have one SM module and you're only going to do one FTD on the module, then you're fine. If you bought one license, right? If you bought one capability license, so your malware, your IPS, your URL, and they got one called carrier, but most people don't use that. So that's 3 licenses you would need for that one box. If you were to chop up your single SM module into 3 separate FTDs, well, now 3 times 3 is 9. You need 9 licenses, one for each FTD instance. Man, you should see some of the people that get like almost throw the FTD at the wall when they find that out. That's why you got to tell them up front before they purchase it what they're getting into from a licensing perspective. Now, again, they may not need the licenses based on the use case of the firewall they're building, but let's say they do want to do that, then they have the use case where they need all 3 licenses on all 3 firewalls, or as many firewalls as they want to build. Make sure you tell them flat out, hey, if you create 3 FTDs in this box, you need the same license for each instance you build. So if you only got web URL or URL licensing, you need 3 or times X, whatever. Now, if they still go into it after they know that, well, now you don't have a pissed off customer because they knew what they signed up for, right? And again, the multi-instance platform is great. You can still do things like inter-chassis clustering and stuff like that. Not that many do that. You can do intra or inter-chassis clustering. Not that many people do that. Most of the time when I see people cluster FTDs, they just have 2 separate boxes. They don't really do it within the same chassis because it kind of doesn't make, I don't want to say it kind of doesn't make sense. Because let's say you had 3 internet firewalls that you did inter chassis clustering. Well, here's the problem. If the chassis goes down, you lose all 3 instances. So it kind of doesn't make sense to do inter chassis clustering. All right. So that was ASA multi-context versus multi-instance on the FTD in a nutshell. If you are a SE or you are in sales, please make sure you watch this video so that you understand when the client actually comes to you and say, hey, we have multi-context firewall. And we want to move to the FTD platform. You can tell them, wait a minute, there's no such thing as multi-context on the FTD. They're multi-instance. So if you're going to have how many, contexts you have in that firewall and on the ASA, you're going to have to spin up a separate instance for each and every context you have. Right. Or you go get the FTD with the ASA code on it, which my personal opinion, I don't even know why you would do that because you miss all the layer 4 through 7 capabilities of the FTD platform. So I'm not really sure why you would do that, but I've seen it out in the wild. And every time I see it, I'm like, well, you just bought a shinier box with the same old ASA code in it. So, but that's a decision on the customer. Hopefully this video was informative. Don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe. And please, whatever you do, if you're an SE or a salesperson, don't make this mistake. This is Don from Padlock Technologies. Thank you and have a nice day.